Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome once again to another version of We the People. Tonight, we have our very first international guest, uh, and this is Mr. Christopher. I'm hoping I'm saying this right, Reese Edwards, and he will be talking to us from Sydney, Australia. Um, Mr. Reese is a vet and a well-renowned author. Good evening, sir.
Good afternoon.
Uh, we can't hear you right now.
Okay. I'm off mute, so I
There
think that's
you.
on your
There.
end.
No, it must have been your volume, but we can hear you well. We can hear
Okay.
you now.
Hey, James, I
Well,
didn't realize you're a fellow vet.
yes, sir. Little further back than you are.
Yeah, you guys trained my generation, so thank you for your service. Yeah,
Oh, hey, some of the toughest soldiers I met in my life were the Aussies.
yeah, they're also a little bit loco too. Yeah.
Well, I jumped out of airplanes. What can I say? So, uh, with that being said, tell us a little bit about yourself and your service.
So I joined pretty much halfway through high school. I always wanted to be a soldier. My dad was a Vietnam vet, and I just had soldier in my blood from about the age of 12. So the first chance I had to get into the military, I joined the Royal Australian Engineers. So I became a combat engineer. So we're the guys who build stuff and blow stuff up. And spent the 90s in uniform doing that, and then got out and moved into the tech sector. Um, Followed through on things I wanted to do, which is writing, which is why we're here today. Studied journalism, worked for News Corps, wrote a few books, and then kind of semi-retired a couple of years ago. And I've started doing a science PhD to develop technology for veterans and people to deal with PTSD through using artificial intelligence. So that's kind of where I'm at today. Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. This AI I find amazing. Especially at my age, I just turned 78 last month, and I'm starting to use this AI, and I find it so authentic. I guess. Can you tell us? Well, before that, let's kind of get things in the proper motion here. So, as a former combat engineer and peacekeeper, what aspects of your military service prepared you for entrepreneurship and innovation?
Well, that's a really easy one because when you sent through some of the guiding questions, I laugh at this one because it drives people I work with nuts. I'm very mission oriented. So when I set myself to achieve something, I use everything from my army skills bag about just being absolutely task focused, doing it to the minute, and not settling for less than what I really expect. And that unrelenting standards is quite tiring for civilians sometimes. And now I'm working with academia, and I seem to be a bit challenging to them because I move fast, I get it done, and I don't apologise if I step on toes. I don't ever mean to offend, but I love the military confidence and almost arrogance that actually has fueled a lot of my success over the years, and I'm really grateful for it.
So, what were the biggest challenges for you, and what advice would you give others making that same leap?
Oh, look, I talk to military guys who are just transitioning out and wanting to work out what they do next with their lives. I don't know about yourself when you left after Vietnam, but in Australia specifically, there's one of the major issues that underpins things around mental health for veterans and also suicide is a lack of a good transition into civilian life because it's so foreign to us. I've been out 20 years and I still don't understand civilians sometimes. And I run 4 or 5 times a week because I have to, and it's part of my DNA being a soldier. And so when I sit down with soldiers who are leaving the system, I say, start thinking about what you want to do a year before you pull the pin. And even if it's just, do you want to do a lawn mowing business just to get yourself out there, doing something constructive every day, moving your body, feeling like you're adding value to the world whilst you work it out? Because it's almost like It's similar to being in prison where you're institutionalized, right? You know this quite well. You have 3 square meals a day. You live with the boys on barracks. Your life is fairly routine. And then you have a real purpose, which is the most important part. As soon as you take that purpose away, it can be really destabilizing. So I now have the benefit of years of being out of the service that I now, when people get pointed towards me and saying, look, I'm thinking about becoming a civilian soon, what do I need to think about? It's like, well, great. First thing you need to do is find a purpose. Anything. Like if you're just trained for a marathon, give yourself structure. Or if you're going to academia and university to learn new skills, start to map out your week, put structure around you and the people around you to support you, and that makes a massive difference.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Like you said, coming home from Vietnam, things were a lot different than they are now. They have much more opportunities, and there are more opportunities to renovate and start your own business, or as you said, it might be a landscaping service. It might be any number of things that you've got accustomed to doing while you were serving your country. Uh, but now there are some things that I really want to get into because you wrote a book, and the book was called The Woke Paradox. Now, it explores the evolution of wokeism and its polarization. In your view, what is the biggest misunderstanding people have about the term woke? I know here in America, uh, in certain parts, it can be a very decisive. I guess that's one way to put it. As well as in Great Britain, is there a difference between the way this is looked at in your country and the way it is felt about in other parts of the world?
I think because we're so connected these days, there's no real difference about the influences in America, the UK, or Australia, just the intensity of the debate around it. So we're still reeling and dealing with the divisiveness of how woke has been devolved down to being less than what it originally was. And when we were speaking before you went live, I said, I feel really weird talking to African Americans about the term woke because it came from an African American vernacular. And woke used to mean being aware of, caring about, and being involved in looking after the needs of people who might be marginalized or under-respected in society. And the goal of woke was to make everyone equal and to bring opportunity to all, education, opportunity with employment, better healthcare, better neighborhoods, things like that, looking at crime and punishment. And now in current terms, it's devolved into this thing where it's people think of woke now as cancel culture. You say the wrong thing, and suddenly you're just kicked off, social media, you kicked off the air, you kicked off radio. Authors like J.K. Rowling's are being pulled through the mud because of her views on transgenderism. And I just think it's a shame because I still believe in the term woke. And that's why at the back of the book, I very specifically said, if you as an individual out there are confused by the whole woke debate, here's what it is in simple terms, and here's some things you can actually do and some language you need to understand to participate in actually making a difference if equality is part of your mandate and something that is important to you. Because there's a lot of misinformation out there. The word has been weaponized, it's being used the wrong way, and the intent that was originally there has been completely ignored. And that's why I decided to write the world's first book that was non-partisan. Both parties want the same thing. They want equality, they want opportunity, they want education, they want healthcare, but they're just doing it in such divisive ways that people just feel absolutely powerless and confused. It's frustrating.
Yeah, definitely. What practical strategies do you propose for moving beyond polarization in today's climate?
Well, there's a couple. What I would suggest at a high level, at a national level, is that people come to the table, both parties and all concerned parties, sit at a table and have open conversations and step away from the empty rhetoric or the weaponized language and reduce it back to do we both fundamentally want? We have the interests of our population at heart. We want better education, better healthcare, better opportunity. We don't want people to be left on the sidelines and struggling. So if we can all agree on that, then it becomes a lot easier when we have the same shared goals to to start to move in the right direction. And so there's always going to have to be trade-offs, unfortunately, because that's the way the world works, right? So I very specifically said in the book, there was a couple of game theory ideas around how we might approach this at a national level. But at an individual level, which is really interesting, there's a whole heap of tips in the back of the book around how you can go out into the community and understand what woke means, what it doesn't mean, and how you can participate. And some of that might just be really simply being empathic and being curious and starting to engage with communities that you normally wouldn't engage with, who you know to be marginalized or kind of, left by the sidelines. And if anyone thinks that an individual can't make a difference, they're sadly delusional, because just the collective action of a few people, this is what brought down the Egyptian government using Twitter and having communication. When people put their minds to it and realize that, our agency, our personal power, when involved with other people, can make a massive difference, things will change pretty quickly.
But here's the problem that I find with that. People are afraid to talk to one another, especially when you're talking about someone from an affluent community talking to a person from a minority culture. And usually it's also the other way around, because the person in the minority culture feels that the affluent person is looking down on them, or they don't understand their plight. How do you get around those type of feelings? One of the things that frustrates me so much here in America is when you talk about the gang and the violence problem, but yet you're not willing to sit down and talk.
I'm 100% on the same page with you. When I was researching the book and speaking to people from all sides, the left, the right, people who thought they were nonpartisan, people who are working in really impoverished communities, people who've grown up in Connecticut with a silver spoon in their mouth. What I think is really interesting is that some people want to devolve the debate down into one thing. And so you just mentioned people growing up in near poverty, right? And sitting down across from someone with, like myself, white privilege. You can't say that it's not easy to sort out poverty if you don't sort out education, if you don't have educational opportunities, you don't have job opportunities. You can't look at enforcement of minorities, for example. Like the amount of African Americans in jail over weed blows my mind. It's 75% of your population. America has more people in jail of its population than anywhere else in the world. And a lot of that is really what we'd regard as fairly petty crime, off the back of Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan's "don't do drugs" thing. So, and now that drugs are legal in the States, why aren't these people out of prison? But that's an isolated issue. And then you start to think about, if there was more education programs for these people, if they had hope that there's a chance they're going into the workforce as well too, rather than having to join gangs and ending up in prisons, because that's the only way to survive. And I've spoken to very, very many of these people who, and a lot of them veterans as well too, who end up in prison because they had no opportunity, they had no hope. And, prison's just like the army, except you just wear a different uniform. So I think when you sit down with someone who comes from a marginalised community and someone with privilege, I think the one thing that has to come out of that debate is ego straight away. You can't be sitting there like, if you have an attitude of appreciative inquiry, like, I understand the mechanics that got you to be in an impoverished situation. I understand that I'm privileged because I grew up in this environment. But how do we meet in the middle? Meet in the middle means conversations that are, you take the passion out of it, you reduce it back to facts, you agree on what the goal is. And I think what we tend to find there is everyone has a shared goal. We all want to be happy. We all want to be loving. We all want to be employed. We want to be able to pay our bills. We want to be healthy. And as soon as you find that common ground, I think that's where change starts to happen.
Yes, that goes back to the days of Martin Luther King and some of our other great civil rights leaders. Leaving your ego at the door. So now, your book bridges the divide between social awareness and cultural backlash. What practical strategies do you propose moving beyond the polarization? As we just spoke of, rich versus poor, white privilege versus, black reparations, all types of baggage that we tend to bring in instead of trying to fix the problem. And
I think you're
another thing that
actually sorry, go
go
on.
ahead, go
I
on.
was just going to say your question actually frames the answer because you're saying it's impoverished versus rich. This whole debate about it's either one or the other ignores the middle ground. And the middle ground is where the change will happen, right? So if I want, back to our last point, if we can bring people to a table from all these different walks of life, including the middle, not just the left and right, and then we can have conversations about shared goals and values, and everyone should have and be respected for the basic sanctity of being a human being and being alive. We should respect them for that. Doesn't matter about your education, doesn't matter about your parents, doesn't matter what state you grew up in. Everyone should be treated equally. And I think that might be hard for some people to do. And I've sat in forums in the States, actually, when I was there a couple of years ago, when I first started researching the book, and they had former criminals sitting down with people who wanted to understand, who come from a greater privilege in society. And these criminals had people who'd been named and they see the label as criminal for life. They said, I'm never going to get past this. I said, you made a mistake, right? You did something because you were desperate. I understand that. I've been there, in the sense of when you've got no money in your pocket, you've got no hope, you're borderline, you'll do any desperate act to survive. And that's a fundamental human thing. People who've never experienced that don't get that. So when you have these people sharing their stories at a table, and then what they're talking about is the fundamental things some of us take for granted. I love that I've got a roof over my head, a good job, money in the bank, I'm well educated, I can run marathons. But there's people out there, they're not worried about running marathons or a roof over their head. They just need the next meal. And so when we can get back to a place of shared equity and understanding, that's where I think we can actually really start to, if people really genuinely care and have empathy, that's where we'll actually start to find solutions as a society that we can then push to our political leaders and to mainstream media to actually get change to actually occur.
But here's the problem that I find, and I know I'm throwing some different things at you here, but
Go for it.
in America, we no longer have a middle class. So that middle group that used to be the sounding board for both groups is no longer there. So where do you find the voice to cut through the conflict?
That's a really good question. And yet again, your actual question has answered the thing. You do have a middle class. They're being drowned out by the left and the right. And that middle class, I think from a social analysis perspective, I think they're called cultural creatives. There's about 50 million Americans who are much more caring about society, about laws, about where they shop for Whole Foods and things like that. They don't want to drive a Tesla or a gas guzzling car. They'd rather take public transport. These people care, but their voices aren't heard when media makes a lot more money out of sharing the stories of the left or right that are really emotional. Because if you can keep people really, really caught up in their discussions and not thinking about the middle, you can sell more ads. You get more attention and you just keep stoking the fire. And that's doing nobody in the middle any good, because that middle could grow very quickly by bringing people up from impoverished or underprivileged areas, by being there for them and actually contributing their voice towards policy and things in practice that changes the opportunities for these people who are, underserved by society. But they need to get cut through. And because middle ground isn't a great media message, because it doesn't sell ads and it doesn't serve the needs of the left and the right. So what we need now is really practical, rational voices being able to use whatever footprint they have, whether it's social media or in your local community or whatever it might be, to start to speak up and say, look, I do actually care about this. I don't believe in cancel culture being used so adamantly, wielded as a weapon. I do believe that everyone should have equality in society, and this is what I believe. And you share that post on social media, all your friends see that, and then their friends see that if you like that. And that is the start of a movement. So the social media that is really these days really dangerous sometimes, because what you post and what you like is pretty much all you'll ever see unless you step outside of that. But if you change what you post on social media and then your friends are supporting you, more people get to see that there are these middle market messages that are really resonant, that they probably haven't heard a lot of because they're caught up in the rhetoric of the left and the right.
Yeah, most definitely. That was some of the things that I found In my first couple of years of podcasting, I found myself doing that. Like you say, you get polarized, and you bring your own baggage to the table, which is something that sometimes is hard to separate.
Yeah,
But
and when you've been doing it for so long too, it becomes instinctive until you actually sense check yourself sometimes. I forget sometimes that, I come from the military and I will always have a soldier's mindset, but I have to remember that people around me don't think the same way as me. And sometimes I have to pull my head in and really stop myself and realize that other people need to be listened to and respected as well. So whilst I'm sitting here talking about showing everyone respect, sometimes by default, I forget to because I'm so caught up in my own bullshit. And we could all benefit from learning that lesson.
oh, most definitely. What was the most surprising or challenging discovery you made while researching the woke paradox?
What I was really surprised by, which we just talked about, was how big the middle part of society is, middle ground, that didn't have a voice. There were so many more people out there that when I said I want to write a non-partisan guide for people to understand woke and to understand how they can impact and step away from all of the weaponized language and the polarization, this is how you can participate in the middle. I didn't think I'd come across so many people who are really supportive of that message, especially in America as well too, because in Australia, all we hear is left or right. We don't hear middle. In Australia, there's a lot more middle because we don't get quite as caught up in the media mix as you do in the States. And the UK is somewhere in between. So I was really, really gratified to jump on phone calls at 3 o'clock in the morning with people in Washington and things like that who really do care. They're middle class and they're frustrated because they don't have a voice. And I'm like, no, you do. You've got social media. You've got your local congressman. You've got people in your local community that you can go and rent out a town hall and get people together from all of the walks of life and get people to talk to each other. Back to your comment from before, get people talking and sharing that we're all pretty much looking for the same things in life, and then agreeing what we're going to do, whether it's social media campaigns, lobbying your local congressman, standing up to businesses who are just showing the woke flag because they want you to come in and spend money, and standing your ground, but actually understanding how to stand your ground. And that's ostensibly in the first year of doing the research for the book. As soon as I realized there was a lot more appetite for how do we participate, because this is really frustrating. I feel like I'm robbed of power. And as soon as I started sharing these kind of things with people, they're like, oh yeah, I could do that. I didn't think I could do that. And every time I had one of those conversations, I started to understand America more, is that the loudest voice gets the attention in media, right? And unfortunately, these people didn't know how to be loud. And as soon as I showed them a few things, strategies they could use, I've heard some great feedback from people that they're starting to actually move the needle a bit. And that's really positive. And that was very unexpected.
Oh, all right. In your TEDx talk, the uncomfortable truth between right and wrong, you discuss ethical dilemmas. How do you apply this framework when analyzing social and political issues today?
I'll give you a great example of this. I was in San Francisco a couple of years ago, and I was walking down Market Street, and the number of veterans on the sides of the road there, something like 35 to 40% of those homeless people sleeping on the streets are veterans. So I'm walking out of one of the, they're called Hotels of the World, at the top of Market Street. It was an old cinema. I walked out in the morning, grabbed my Starbucks coffee, which I love, was walking down the street, and just noticed all these people in old combat gear. I could see their ranger badges and things like that, their unit pins. And I was just like, I'm walking down Market Street in San Fran. I've been able to fly across business class from Australia, and got my coffee. I'm doing a day of meetings to raise money for my new startup and things like that. And here's this guy, a veteran, a fellow veteran, who's just asking, could you just buy me a burger? And the one thing that these guys told me when I was in San Fran, this is my ethical dilemma. I've got all this privilege and I've got the ability to walk down the street and buy everyone meals. That's totally fine. But that's a short-term solution, right? And for me, as an ethical dilemma, I'm there to raise a couple of $1 million to build a business that supports veterans. But in front of me is 20 guys I'm going to cross before I walk across the next block who are just struggling to survive the day. And as an ethical dilemma, that really did put me in my place to think, okay, well, what else could I do outside of just buying food for someone? And one of the things that one of the veterans told me, he was a ranger, And I served with the Rangers in Australia when they came on a training exercise, and they were awesome. And you were airborne, weren't you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And they were saying the difference between veterans and homeless civilians in America is a homeless civilian will ask you for money. A veteran will ask you for food or water because of their pride. And it's like, look, we're just trying to transactionally stay alive. I don't need money to go and buy drugs. I just want to eat. I just want to drink clean water. And I just thought it's terrible that that has to become a thing. So ethically, I find those situations are really quite confronting, but I think we need to be confronted if we're going to create change. People with a lot of privilege don't want to see somebody begging, panhandling in the street just to survive because they think that's a lack of dignity. Do you imagine how much courage it takes to walk up to a complete stranger and ask for money or food just to survive? And because it's so much emotion and ego caught up in that, we won't move forward. But until we put those people in a room together, or we have people talking to the middle who are actually aware of both sides of the debate, who could act as a conduit to actually talk and translate between the two parties. So this debate, this whole debate is an ethical dilemma because woke was meant to actually serve the underserved. Now woke is being used as a media and political weapon, and those who are meant to be benefiting from this are being completely ignored. Ethically, somebody has to stand up, or all of us have to stand up and address that debate and say, look, we want to participate, and let's move away from the rhetoric to what can we do today as a society, and what can our leaders do, and what can business do to serve the needs of those people, back to the original intent of what woke was meant to be.
Yeah, that's I'm one of those that staunchly feel that there should not be a homeless veteran. You know,
Yes.
we've served our country. Given it our all in some cases, and people don't understand or don't want to seem to think that there are 22 veterans that commit suicide every day. Do you know how many people that is in a year, in a decade? And these are people that have served to keep us free. But let me get off my soapbox here.
I understand that. It's the reason I started my last business, because in Australia, it's a veteran takes their own life every 4 days. And for every one of those who tries and succeeds, another 10 to 15 have planned to or tried to. And I was one of them. I was suicidal a few years ago, and I was saved by a phone call, basically. And that's where I started to discover all these stats. And it's heartbreaking. And then you look at the holiday season where these guys and women who've served our countries don't have family, and they might be on the streets, and the suicide rate goes up to 3 times that. And it's just, that to me is heartbreaking. But that's us on our soapboxes as veterans, But that's an underserved part of society that we need to be woke to and serve the needs of, because they served us. Let's serve them.
Yeah, many veterans struggle with that, as you said before, a transition to civilian careers. What was the biggest challenges for you, and what advice would you give others making that leap? I think now we have many, many more organizations that help veterans and that also understand the need of veterans. But the biggest thing that we need now is funding for those things.
Yes. Yeah. And it's really interesting. Like, we have some great ex-service organizations in America. I know you have some amazing ones in the US as well too. I've met with a few of them, and they're doing great work. And funding is always an issue, right? So we have 580,000 veterans in Australia. I think you have about 22 million veterans in America, and
Somewhere around in there.
It's phenomenal when you think about it, because really we're about 2 to 5% of society that put on uniforms in service of our country, right? But then you see all this funding going towards great big sports and things like that, where there's people like you and I and our friends that we've served with. Some of them are sleeping rough on the streets tonight, but we're happy to build a new stadium for like X number of $1 billion because we really love our sports. But there's got to be a middle ground, because any society that fails the people who've served it and fails the people at the coalface who originally did the really hard work, the people who work. Your salary in America, for example, just mainstream for a cafe worker is like $6 an hour minimum wage. How does somebody working 50 hours a week live on $6 an hour? And in Australia, ours is like 2 times that, if not more. And these really basic things that we could put in place, where the funding is out there being thrown away at things like Olympics campaigns and new sports stadiums or like Elon Musk. And we could reappropriate that money to be looking after marginalised communities, veterans on the streets, homeless in general, putting up small housing communities where veterans can actually have a level of respect again, have their own space, and then retrain them and redeploy them into society to do a whole range of jobs. Because I think you'd agree with this, veterans don't want to be sitting idle on the sidelines in life as a civilian. And I guess the one thing that you asked in the question was, what was my biggest challenge when I got out? I left the military and got a job pretty quickly in media because I like talking and they pay people really well to talk in media. And that was early 2000s. And my base salary was 1.5 times my military salary. And then my bonuses were that again. And I was sitting in a room with all these guys who'd gone to private schools and things. And I was the only person there in the room that had come from outside of private schools, really. And everyone's in suits. I was in the first suit I'd worn, barring a few funerals and weddings. And they said, go around the table and tell us what in 1 minute your background. And so I was the last person to speak. And I said, well, my name's Chris. Up until a few months ago, I was a combat engineer in the Army, served as a peacekeeper in the South Pacific. Here's a couple of things about me. I love running marathons, blah, blah, blah. And people looked at me like I was the freak. And I said, look, I've come across to work in media and tech because I can see that tech is going to play an increasing role in society. And I want to be across that. Now, every single person in that room had said, I've come across to tech because this is a good company to work for because it's going to look good on my CV. And I said, I wanted to come in here to learn because I realized that tech is going to change the way that we view and interact with the world, because I could see that using tech and understanding tech would help me actually help my fellow man. So they were all looking at these really individualistic goals about this is going to look great on a piece of paper. It's going to shape my career. I'm trying to work out how to shape society with my knowledge here, because my mum was a local community activist, became a politician, was really real respected in the community. And she taught us that you need to serve your country. And so I went to the military. My sisters went to public service. We have about 60 years of public service between my sisters and I and my mum. And I'm very proud of that because we think in terms of the greater good. And it doesn't mean you don't have a great life. I've had a fantastic life. But I do think that having purpose in front of us was the thing that most people that I've seen as civilians, they have goals in front of them, but they don't have a greater purpose. And Viktor Frankl, the psychologist who was in the death camps during World War II, he said, like, if people live happier lives if they have a why. And Simon Sinek talks about this. You have a reason to live, someone to love, or a mission to fulfill in life. That means you get out of bed in the morning knowing where you're going, what you've got to do, and you just get it done. And that certainty gives us a certain sense of resilience and confidence about our ability to actually engage with the world. And as you know, when you're in the military, guys who actually know they're about to be deployed, whatever, the energy levels and their focus and the attention and the esprit de corps is like nothing you've ever experienced. So if we could get more people in mainstream society to actually really deeply believe in more than just a white picket fence, a new car, my local sporting team or whatever, none of those are bad by any means. I'm not denouncing them. I'm just saying, find something that is really meaningful to you and do that really well. That was the thing that I really still miss as a civilian, being a soldier at heart.
Yeah, kind of taking that a step further, the longer you live, it's kind of like the smaller your circle becomes.
Yes.
And it's almost, as you say, finding a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. You're constantly, bombarded by, the different things that happen in your life, and sometimes you need, someone to talk to, someone to go to, and you miss that camaraderie. Do you find the same thing kind of applies to retired veterans also?
I think there's a couple of things in that. I mean, you're definitely right about as you get older, your circle gets smaller, and the things that really you want to spend your time with becomes much more precious. The last book I wrote before this one was about midlife reinvention, because I really don't like this attitude about as soon as you hit mid 40s or 50, you're on the decline. And it's ridiculous because your priorities change after you hit your 50s, right? You've been in workforce for a period of time. If you've got kids, they're usually grown up. And you start to think about, what's my legacy? Outside of family and things like that, what's really important that I've wanted to do that I haven't done yet? And for some people, it's writing books, it's career changes, it's community activism, it's travel, and just whatever it might be for you. And
having a podcast.
Sorry?
Getting your view out, having a podcast, getting your own view out.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about the woke debate, what you're doing right now, right? Everyone can do that. With a bit of experience and a little bit of gear, you can get your voice out there. And I spoke to a podcast 2 nights ago at 3:00 in the morning. She has 300 followers. They're all family and friends on Facebook and everything. But that's 300 people who have exposure to the podcast episode we did, where she's talking about how do I participate in the woke debate. I said, you are right now. You're sharing voices that aren't being heard. Keep doing that, because when you share this and you share this on social and your other channels or via email or whatever it might be, those people see it. Some of those will share it, and you start to get momentum. So I think what you're doing, I absolutely applaud, because I've had podcasts reach out to me, and then I say, look, I'm very happy to talk about the woke debate, but I am non-partisan. I don't want to talk about politics. I want to talk about practice and principle. And they've actually said no to me because they want me to toe the left or the right line. And to me, that doesn't serve the purpose. So they're trying to drive an agenda, and I guess I am too, but I'm not going to jump on a podcast and sell a measure of my soul and say, no, I agree with the right or the left. Whereas to an extent, I do. I agree with a lot of their principles, but I don't agree with the practice and how it's being pushed out in society. So yeah, look, I will align myself and with people like yourself who want to share a narrative that is more middle ground and more reasonable and rational. And so I applaud you for actually having me on and celebrating voices like this, because this is part of the change. This is the modern version of Rosa Parks sitting on the bus and refusing to stand up. This is why I got into technology, because now you can have a voice. You're being seen in Australia right now, right, by my friends. I'll send this out to the guys this afternoon, and a couple of thousand people that you don't know, will likely never meet, are going to see your face, see that I got to chat to a Vietnam vet, which makes my day, and they'll hear the message that we're sharing.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. That's like I said. That's one of the goals that I set. After I retired. To find a purpose, and a podcast and hearing other people's views is a part of it. Now, you've won a global innovation award in the health tech sector. What's one breakthrough or project that you believe has the most potential to change lives?
Actually, I won a couple of global innovation awards in 2019 for technology we developed to detect PTSD episodes in veterans that worked on smartwatches. And it was really smart at the time. It was great. And now it's built into a lot of smartwatches. But we're able to interrupt if you were starting to get stressed and your biochemistry was saying you're either going to have a panic attack or you're going to go into a real stress incident. We could actually break that cycle. And so that was an interesting experience for me. And then just a couple of years ago, I thought, what if we could take the new version of technology? So that was just looking at heart rate. I thought, what if we could apply artificial intelligence to becoming something that veterans could use in a way to actually have conversations about their mental health with a machine in a way that they're not being judged. They can do it 24/7. They can say whatever they want. And it's going to offer them therapy in a sense that you would get from a psychologist, but a watered down version to help you think about your thinking. Because the biggest problem veterans face, and we both know this, you get inside your head sometimes if you don't have purpose, you don't feel like you integrate in society, you don't have a reason to get out of bed, you don't have your mates around you anymore, because civilian mates aren't the same as military mates. And I say that with love for my civilian mates. You get inside your head, and that's where it's dangerous. So I just decided that artificial intelligence, and specifically generative AI, which is ChatGPT, which you can go onto right now. Anyone can go to chatgpt.com and type in, I'm having a rough day. And ChatGPT will respond because it's read the whole internet using cognitive behavioral therapy models and actually have a dialogue with you in real time and say, so what's going on, man? Talk to me. And it can measure a certain amount of empathy, and it can talk you down off a ledge, literally. So I'm looking at a very specific use case of that, which we're developing right now. We have it live. That is not open to the whole web. It's not open to everyone to use, but it's built around a lot of psychological models to actually help people like you and I. If we have no one to talk to right now, we could go onto an app or on the internet, go to a certain URL and talk as openly. And I mean talk, not just type. You can talk to our technology and say, hey, it's been a bad day. And that technology can actually measure the stress in your voice, what you say, the inflection, and can really guide you towards better thinking strategies, maybe even real-time support if you need it as well too. And I think that for me is where people think artificial intelligence is inherently a risk to society in a sense. There's that voice when we talk about the left and the right again, the doomsayers. But I do think there's more potential, especially in the health sector and around psychology and social change, that AI can play a significant role in giving what the World Health Organization says that 1 in 8 people on this planet has a mental disorder of some form, from stress, anxiety, depression, PTSD. And most of those people will never go and see a professional because they don't have access to one, they can't afford it, or they're scared of stigma. And this is where AI comes in, because AI gets past all those barriers. If you've got connection to the internet, you can engage with technology that's smarter than you and I, that can actually talk to you in a meaningful way and actually help you with where you're at right now, and maybe guide you to help you sleep better at night, or help you find a professional or groups of people you can speak to actually help you with whatever you're dealing with.
Now, you're currently pursuing a PhD in human computer interaction.
Yep.
4 or 5 years ago, wasn't this something that was unheard of?
The application of it in mainstream society, specifically around artificial intelligence, 5 years ago was not even a field that you'd look at. It's so emergent and it's moving so fast. But there was this concept of Moore's law, which used to say that every 18 months, technology would double in capacity. And that law has been outdated. It used to be taught at universities for years and years and years. And that was outdated a decade ago, because our capacity to actually process information, for technology to be smarter and faster, is, month by month, it's changing. It's absolutely ridiculous how fast technology changes. And now that technology plays such a fundamental role in society, and you got practical examples. This podcast stream right now, 10 years ago, wouldn't have been as seamless as it is now. There would have been buffering issues and things like that. And now it enables you to get your voice out there on scale around the planet. This technology in 5 years' time will be totally different. You can see that Skype is about to shut, right? Because Zoom has taken over from Skype. People are really comfortable now with video calls and all, because of COVID and being locked in home. We wanted to see faces, we wanted to interact. And Zoom was a much better natural experience for doing those video calls than Skype. So Skype is disappearing. New technologies are emerging all the time. So my degree, the stuff that I'll finish when I graduate with my PhD, half of what I've learned will be so outdated by the time I've actually graduated, because new technologies come along. And I think it's exciting. It's terrifying in some ways, but it's good to be part of that, because if I can shape the technologies that are available to us today in a meaningful way that can impact people's lives that I'll likely never meet in positive ways, fantastic.
It kind of puts things in perspective, because now I have a computer in my hand. I can do anything with this.
Yeah.
Many years ago, when I came back from Vietnam, you needed a room full of IBM punch cards to have a program.
Yeah.
So, so as you say, technology, has come a long way. And if you're even 4 or 5 years behind now, it's almost like being in another century.
You look at the phone that you just held up has more processing power than a 1980s commercial jumbo jet. And then you look at the power of that phone in society now, right? I was speaking to the former chief digital officer for New York City a couple of years ago, and he said he had a task. He ran all of the people who ran all of digital for New York, right? New York City, at least. And he said, I had an experiment where I decided to actually use my phone and not touch a laptop or a desktop for a month to see how much I could do on my phone. So have a guess how much time in a month running one of the biggest digital teams of a city in America, how much time did he actually spend on a laptop in a month? Just random guess.
Oh, my goodness. In a month, probably, I'd say, 10 hours a day?
Well, he got it down in a month to the only time he spent off his phone using a laptop was 8.5 minutes. How crazy is that?
Yeah. Like you said, this is, you can do anything with your phone nowadays. You can make movies or anything else. So, like you said, it is very remarkable. Can you still hear me?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just waiting for just
Okay.
let you speak.
No. So let's talk a little bit about your writing and storytelling. You've written multiple genres, from social commentary to personal development. What draws you to creative nonfiction, and how do you make complex topics accessible to your readers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always been a big fan of writing and literature and reading in general. I got my first black eye when I was 11, when I went to get up on a Saturday morning and go and play with my mates in the park, and it was raining, and I whinged in front of my mother. And just out the corner of my eye, I saw this shadow come across the room, and she clocked me in the head with a book. She'd thrown it across, and she said, "Read, stop whinging." And that's how much she drummed into us the value of education and writing, the written word. So I got my first black eye at 11 because I was hit by a book. And that I now still read one or two books a week. And what I've really liked, what always resonated with me was creative nonfiction, especially when I was kind of a part-time journalist when I was at News. I was writing some of my own stories because my journalists wouldn't write them. I started writing about euthanasia law reform because Australia was the first country in the world to legally euthanize someone back in, I think it was about 96. And people didn't understand it. And the guy who was the campaigner for it, he was called the Death Doctor, was back in the media, and nobody wanted to write about the story. So I interviewed him and wrote the story. Now, this is why I love creative nonfiction. When I heard he was in the media and he was called the Death Doctor, I just thought, this guy is, life is sacred. And anyone who's taking people's lives outside of soldiers and people who have to do it in the line of duty is an animal. And so he explained to me how he was helping people die with dignity who are dying from cancer, people who are terminal, and giving them the choice over how they passed away and how their families experienced their last moments with them. And what it landed for me in talking to this man about this deeply personal and divisive issue was, my grandfather was this very erudite man, successful guy, had his own business, very verbal as well too. He used to open a dictionary for 35 years and read a new word every day. So when he had a stroke and was relegated to a wheelchair where people were basically wiping his ass and looking after him, he could barely speak to me the last time I saw him in the early 90s. And the penny dropped for me when I just thought, if he'd asked me to help him end his life, and I was a soldier at the time, would I have done it now knowing what I know? And the absolute answer is yes. If he wanted to die with dignity and he was rational enough to have that conversation with me today, I would absolutely say yes. And so that story needed to be told outside of news stories, like a typical linear news story in Huffington Post or Fox or News, whatever. So that was the start of me writing my first book, Good Reasons to Kill. And I looked at violence around the world by sharing the actual stories of people. And that's where creative nonfiction comes in. You take a news story, you interview the person, you stitch it all together into a narrative that is basically like a short story about this person's experience of combat or euthanasia or honor killings or whatever it is. And so that book went really well because I was sharing people's experiences of the world that other people, it was so foreign to them. And this is the same back to the woke debate. This is why I'm very passionate about why I wrote the book, is because people out there who've had such a privileged life, or even the middle market, who've never experienced worrying about where your next meal is coming from, or if you're ever going to have a real career or make a name for yourself, or if you're living in an unsafe neighborhood, if you haven't experienced it and you don't understand it, it's very hard to weigh in on the debate. And so it creates separation. So by sharing people's stories through creative nonfiction, you really do help actually bridge a gap that exists out there and stop it from being just left and right. And you start to accelerate the middle and amplify that. And people go, oh, okay, I understand that now. Now what do I do? And so that's why I love creative nonfiction, because it's facts shaped in a way to actually tell a story rather than just tell facts. And yeah, it's just been a genre that I've really loved.
Of your five books, which one was the most difficult to write, and why?
Good Reasons to Kill. Yeah, I interviewed and researched about 500 people in total, everything from serial killers to honor killings, euthanasia, soldiers, police, wives who killed husbands over domestic violence, people who accidentally killed people protecting other people. So that's really put me, I've got PTSD from my time in the military and also growing up in a fair amount of violence in the home. And so that sunk me into hospital twice, because taking on board these people's stories, because I go in there empathically without judgment, and listen to these stories, and it takes a toll on your soul. So I have a lot of respect for social workers and people who do this for a living, because it took me probably 2.5, 3 years to research it all before I wrote it. And then at the end of it, I took 6 months off. I was absolutely mentally and emotionally exhausted, and then started to write something a little bit lighter because I couldn't go through that again. And now coming back into the woke debate and speaking to a guy who just got out of prison, same age as me, and we had so much in common. We grew up with an alcoholic father who was a Vietnam vet. He got caught up in gangs. I think it was Pittsburgh, I think he said he was from. I might be getting that wrong. But he got caught up in a gang to survive, and to actually sell drugs and get food to bring home, because mum was on gear. She was on heroin, I think. Ended up having as a gang initiation to shoot a kid to actually get his colours for the gang, and ended up in prison. And so he'd only got out about a year or two before I spoke to him a few months ago. And I just thought, man, just the toss of the dice by the gods, that could have been me. I mean, I could have ended up in crime, if drugs were available in my community and that was a desperation act that I needed to do to put food on the table for my family. I absolutely would have done that, And you think about the stuff they make us do as soldiers. When you're a civilian, it doesn't make sense to you. But when you're indoctrinated into this environment that all you know by nature and nurture is that violence is going to be part of your credo going forward, you have to accept it and then learn to deal with it. Everything becomes easier. So this guy, out of desperation, killed someone, served his time for it. He's back out there in the real world now trying to make a life for himself. And if more people heard his story and say, like, the system let him down. Yes, his mum, for whatever reason, was on drugs. Yes, his dad, you guys didn't have a lot of support coming back from Vietnam like the guys do coming back from Afghanistan and things, but even that's not enough, I would argue. So he was set up to fail from day one. And then growing up in an impoverished suburb, no employment opportunities. He was terrible at school because his parents had never really evangelized education as a way for him to get ahead. And yeah, but for the grace of God, go I. I could have been exactly that guy because we had exactly the same backgrounds, just slightly different contexts. And it is amazing when you think about it.
It's amazing that you mentioned Pittsburgh. That's where I moved here from.
Right.
I didn't know whether you saw my sign back there.
Yep, I did. Yep.
I'm a Steelers fan. So, now you are a finalist for the Prime Minister's Veteran Entrepreneur of the Year Award. What leadership lessons from the military served you best in the business world? And could you tell us a little bit more about this prestigious award?
Well, I was a finalist. I didn't win, but that's okay because I'm just glad they celebrate veterans as a distinct part of society, doing stuff after being in the service and contributing to mainstream society. So I think it's a great program. It was an honour to actually be a finalist, I tell you, and sitting in our version of Washington, which is called Canberra, inside our Parliament House, with our Prime Minister there, the Minister for Veteran Affairs. It was humbling, to be fair. And I'm sitting in the room with all these veterans who are launching businesses and employing other veterans and other people and making really positive contributions. So I think the thing that I take from military life that I took to startup life, which is kind of like military, it's a bit chaotic at times, then it goes really quiet, but there's a lot of demands on you. You wear different hats. I think being open to being challenged and being uncomfortable, which is something that we all get in the military, right? You get very good at, you don't know what's coming next and you just have to suck it up and get it done. And in the startup world, and it was a really bumpy ride for me. I was never meant to be a CEO of a startup. I acknowledge that now, but we built incredible technology. I formed a really great team. We moved really fast. We were iterating product. So we had a technology product that was built on this smartwatch that every 3 days we're evolving that technology, which is just an incredible pace. And so my motivation to solve the problem, which was veteran mental health, kept me getting out of bed at like 2 o'clock in the morning most of the time. So I was getting 3 hours sleep a night for about a year and a half. And I was so committed to it that I had to work out how to wind myself back to an extent so that the civilians who worked for me, because half my team was veteran, half were civilians, the veterans got it. When they got an email from me at 3 o'clock in the morning, they didn't respond at 3, but they understood that. Whereas the civilians were getting really stressed about the fact that, oh my God, my boss is emailing me at 3 o'clock in the morning. What haven't I done? Because in France, for example, it's illegal to email people after hours or on the weekend. And my team was so invested in my mission, which became our mission, that they kind of accepted it's okay. Like if the boss is emailing me at 3 a.m, it means he hasn't slept yet and he's got an idea, but I can respond at 7 a.m. That's fine. But that energy is the reason I was nominated for the Prime Minister's Award, and we won the 2 innovation awards globally. Because as soon as you wrapped everyone up into a mission, back to that why thing again, Simon Sinek and Viktor Frankl, when people have a purpose in front of them, when they haven't really had a really definitive purpose before, this is where I think army people and people who work in emergency services like police and ambos and fireys, your job is the protection of life. And you have these great big ideas in front of you like peace and safety and defense and things like that. And these are much bigger things to be thinking about than the average person is doing when they're trying to pay a mortgage, get promoted, get their kids through school, trying not to eat too many Twinkies, whatever. So I just thought, I think the relentless focus on having something to put your heart and soul into was what helped us succeed, and which has really helped me now with my studies and with the new technology we're building, because even my academic supervisors just say, you move at a pace that we're not used to. And so I'm kind of pushing them because I'm not trying to rush anything, but I want to get something out there sooner rather than later so we can test it in real time to see if it's doing the things we want it to do. And if not, fix it and keep moving. But I don't intend to slow down as I get older. When I get your age, I'll be the same. I'll just have less hair. And what there is going to be grey, but I'll still have the same amount of soldier energy.
No, wisdom. Yeah. But now, innovation often requires resilience in the face of failure. Can you share a time when you failed and how you rebounded from it?
Yeah, look, a great example is the one that I won the awards for. Like, I was so out of my depth as a CEO of a startup that within about a year of running that and raising money to fund the growth of the business, I was looking for a CEO, knowing that I didn't have that skill set and relying heavily on my investors and advisors to guide me. And, dropped the ball on a few things, but for the most part, we stayed on goal. And it was hard to actually close that business because we couldn't raise extra cash. We had a bunch of political machinations in the background, and I couldn't find a CEO in time. So we closed the business, sold off the IP, and it took me a couple of years to bounce back from that. I ended up in Estonia working on a program with the government over there around health for Estonian citizens. And the reason I went there is they're the most digitally sophisticated economy in the world. I mean, you can vote online over there, look at your own medical records over there. Everything's on blockchain, so it's incredibly secure. For this tiny little nation of like 1.3 million people, they are so advanced by comparison to the Western world. So it was a great place to go and learn, to lick my wounds and think about what do I want to do next. And I had to sit back and reflect on where I'd failed, but also remember what I'd learned from it as well and what the wins were. Because when you fail, you tend to spend so much time thinking about the failure, but every time you fail in life, there's a lesson to be learned. And that's one thing I learned in the military. Like, I was deathly scared of heights when I joined the military, and within 6 months I was jumping out of planes. So you have to push yourself. I honestly believe that when people have a challenge in front of them, you're not going to win all the time. Babies learn to walk by falling over. As a startup founder, I fell over. I got feedback from a bunch of people as to why and how, and I won't do that again. So for this new venture, we're looking for a CEO right now. We've identified a couple because my skill set lies in being the guy with the mission and the idea, and I put people around me to actually who are better at what they do than I am. And I think Richard Branson said that, find people more experienced and with more expertise and knowledge than you, and set them free. Just point them in the right direction and get out of their way. That's what I'm doing these days. So it was a very hard cross to bear for a couple of years. I was suicidal a couple of times. I got death threats from one of the people involved at one stage. And, that's a pretty heavy thing to actually, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But, I came through, and it's strengthened my resolve to do it better next time.
Ah, very good. Very good. Let's talk a little bit about men's mental health and personal growth, because you advocate for men's health. Mental health, that is, what do you think is the most overlooked aspect of this conversation? As you mentioned, when you were in San Francisco, the veterans, the homeless veterans, we had the same problem down here in San Diego. not just the veterans, but also families, women with children. Uh, so when you talk about mental health, I think this is another thing that greatly um, increases uh, suicide or suicide risks when you feel that either you don't matter or that you cannot provide for yourself sufficiently, as you mentioned with the book that you were writing. But you know, once you lose that sense of hope, or as you have said many times, that sense of purpose, how do you find helping those people recover? We've just now start understanding PTSD within the last 15 to 10 to 15 years. When I came home, you were crazy, combat fatigue, whatever you want to call it, But now we recognize, that especially being a soldier, there are certain things that you carry with you. There's some nights when I wake up in cold sweats, even now.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've known about, and I'll just start on PTSD for a second too, because a percentage of society experiences PTSD on a regular basis. So in Australia, about 7 to 10% of society has a version of PTSD. So I have complex PTSD, which means I've gone through sustained trauma, growing up in violence with my dad kicking the shit out of me, and then going to the military. And then there's PTSD, which is an incident. It might just be one incident, like an assault, a car accident, a loss of somebody that was just unexpected that you were present for. So PTSD can be caused by many things, but we've known what it is without having that label since World War One. So the term, when you say someone is mortified, came from World War One, because the mortar shells would land next to people, and that shell shock and that percussion was giving people PTSD, and so they didn't have a term for it. But as you said, like Vietnam, we just thought you were crazy when you came home, right? And I think, James, you're crazy in a different way. But like, I look at my dad; he was broken, you know. And so now that we understand it, that's great. But the understandings come from research, and also because, and this is back to your original question, how do we help more men around mental health? I think talking about it is the big thing straight off the start. Like, this is the first time I've shared my journey about my failure with the first startup publicly, because I was embarrassed by it. I was ashamed by my contribution in that. And also because I was ashamed to talk about failure as a person, as a man, because as men, we don't speak about the deep, dark things that sit in the back of our heads. And some of that can kill you. So for my mates, like, there's a few of them that every now and then they'll reach out at really weird times, and that's usually an indication to me that it's really important, because if I don't hear from them for a long time, then they suddenly reach out. I know it's important and something is burning. And so being able to, we have Are You OK Day here in Australia, which is about mental health. And it's about, on that day, just acknowledging the fact that there's nothing wrong with, if you see something different with a friend, walking up and saying, "You okay, man? Do you want to have a beer? Do you want to have a chat? Anything on your mind?" We're getting much better as men in my generation, not so much yours, but you're kind of facilitating this conversation now, which is all part of the solution. But my generation is getting much better, and the one behind me, about asking for help or acknowledging that I don't have all my cards in the same deck. I'm struggling. And I think that's where the
My
change.
generation, that was a sign of weakness.
Yeah, and mine as well too. Like, we were trained by you guys, right? So the guys, my original DS and Staffo warrant officers were all Vietnam vets, and they were hard but fair men. But we never talked about, sometimes you go back and you cry after a mate suicided or something like that. You don't cry publicly. You go back to your room, you cry, you suck it up with a few beers, and you move the fuck on. Excuse my French. And that's been a pervasive mindset. And it's frustrating. Like, Hollywood we still see the action hero who dives through windows and watches friends die and everything else, and it kind of re-embodies this idea of men are strong, men are powerful, men don't show weakness. But the reality is that we're all weak at times, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so when I started sharing my story, when I launched my last startup in 2017, I had to get on stage in front of 500 people and say, 2 years ago, I was standing on top of a 7-story building about to jump when I was interrupted by a phone call, because my marriage had just devolved, and it was my fault because I hadn't been dealing with my PTSD, and I was about to kill myself when it was actually a message from a friend came through and said, "Look, I haven't seen you on social media for a few days. You okay?" So him actually reaching out to me in real time And to this day, I don't know if I would have jumped, but I was definitely doing the math. I'd been up there a couple of times before and said, no, I won't do that to my family and friends. Then had a particularly bad couple of days, ended up on top of this building and just thinking, well, there's nothing really holding me back outside of my love for the people that are in my life, and I couldn't be that cruel to them. But unfortunately, for, as you said, 22 guys a day and women a day in America, one every 4 days in Australia, they don't get to think it that rationally through because they're so overwhelmed by what's going on inside their heads that they forget to reach out. They get so caught up in their own stuff. But my message there is, please, please, please don't ever forget that there's someone around you somewhere, even if it's just Lifeline as a call center, that wants to hear you and wants to keep you breathing.
Yeah, that does mean a lot, to have that someone that you can talk to in time of need. And as I said, that was one of the hardest things in the world for me to do. As a matter of fact, it was just 2003 when I actually started making that type of decision to where it was okay to talk. And but that was a sign of weakness, and it was something that was very hard to get over. I went to some anger management classes with some of the guys that you spoke of from Afghanistan and Iraq, and I couldn't understand why these people were angry. I mean, we were doing 13-month tours of duty. You did 6. You come home to a parade. We came home to quite a different scene. But like I said, it's remarkable the advancement that we've made, not only in technology, but I guess in the evolution of man and being able to talk to one another instead of constantly being in conflict.
Yeah, it's I'd be very interested to hear as well too what finally convinced you in 2002 to open up and talk and share your story and share what's going on in your head, because the evolution of man from, we haven't had to be a physically orientated species since in the Middle Ages, where the sweat off our brow helped the nobles survive and all, and you had to get up in the morning as soon as the sun came up, pick crops, plant trees, cut wood, whatever. And now we replace that with sport or going to the gym and things, because I think men need a physical outlet because men like to feel accomplished, and that's great. But I also think that in simpler times, and the world is much more complex than it was even 2 generations ago, that a lot more is asked of you. So there's a fine line between being manly and opening a door for someone as a really simple gesture. But now there's this new kind of mindset that I see in the younger generation where it's also manly to say, it's becoming manly to say, I just don't feel comfortable with that. And speaking from a place of vulnerability, which Brene Brown talks about quite a bit. And I applaud that, as long as we don't go too far down the rabbit hole like has happened with woke, where we start to cancel culture people because we don't like their message for some reason. Sometimes that's valid, sometimes it's not. But anyone who can be a role model for speaking up as men, as I'm doing right now, as you're doing right now, that encourages other men to speak up if something doesn't feel quite right, then great, and it will change. There'll be more wars and more soldiers going off to war, and they'll come back to different programs and practices. You guys got spat on. Guys came back from Afghanistan with parades. The next war we'll hope to be involved in, I don't know what that is, what that looks like. I do definitely think we should celebrate the people who go out there to defend our national interests and protect other people. But I don't think we should be actually, lauding them like sports stars. But every single one who's going to come home is a soldier of their time. And their mindset that they have is still going to be, for people like us, that men are strong and men don't show weakness. How we show weakness in the future is going to come down to how these conversations get circulated in current times to shape the narrative of the guys following us. And if we can embolden them to actually be more vulnerable publicly, even if it's just with family and friends, not so much in forums like this, which are available to the world, great. And so even in this, we're actually participating in actually shaping the next generation for the 2 people or the 200 or the 2,000 people that see this. And I think that's great.
Yes. Mental health was something, that I also contribute a lot of the homelessness for. When we had one administration closed down most of the mental hospitals, which also helped increased the homeless population and has kept it, I think, at a steady pace. Um, but how do we get to a place, especially men, how do we get to a place where we can shift the cultural narrative to make vulnerability a strength?
By doing this. I mean, honestly, I think that if people see a positive outcome from other people being vulnerable, then they're more likely to take up that action. So our fellow veterans out there who might be seeing this, and hello to all of you out there, and thank you all for your service. This is two people, two different generations who have actually served our countries. And we both admit we don't have all our shit together. We still struggle with stuff. We still wake up in cold sweats, but we now speak about it. And we're alive today because of it. And so many of our friends aren't. So, you know, we get more people to be vulnerable by being vulnerable publicly. And if that publicly just means me with my two mates in a bar saying, I've had a really shit week. I'm not sleeping because I'm having nightmares based on an incident that might have occurred, which happens to me not as frequently now that I'm seeing a therapist more and I'm medicated. But in sharing that, I did that a few months ago, and a mate just goes, well, actually, I didn't want to say this in front of the other mate who'd gone to the bar to get us more drinks. He said, I've been having flashbacks. I said, well, you know, you can actually, through therapy and through medication, you can actually suppress that part of the brain that has the flashback, because he said, every time I have flashbacks, I drink more, I argue with my wife more, and I call in sick more to work. He started taking medication and seeing a therapist, and he has a flashback at like half the interval now. So he's more productive, he's arguing less with his wife, and he's exercising and sleeping more. So, and me being vulnerable in front of them, just sitting in a bar having a nice steak and beers with the boys, was enough for him to change his behavior. He's going to do the same thing for the next person who comes down the line. So we've just shown people how to be vulnerable and what the benefits are. So share that story.
Yeah. Speaking of 2003, you asked me why I made that change. I actually moved from Pittsburgh out here to San Diego, and one of my doctors told me that I should go back to anger management. And it was in those anger management classes that I actually found out, that it was better to teach one or to get one to understand what I was going through in relationship to what they were going through. And that actually turned my whole life around. I decided to do podcasts. I decided to get more involved in the community, and it actually was kind of me coming out of a shell, because before I had all of these fences around me, and do not enter, minefield, all these warning, danger, and then I came to the realization that this was having an adverse effect on myself, and I was getting older. And as I said, my circle was getting much smaller, and I actually, feared, that, I might not be remembered. All of us want to think that we make some kind of an impact on someone's life. And, I felt that I had so shielded myself that people were afraid to actually approach me. And that was one of the things that actually completely turned my life around.
And that's not unusual, and it's not the first time I've heard that, right? So as we get older and we think about legacy, and as we get older and more set in our ways, we become very conscious of the people we spend time with and how we use our time and what we want to be remembered by. And I think when you talk about impact and legacy, back to your point about the value of actually just helping one person, it's that starfish principle, right? You walk along the beach and you see all these starfish on the beach after a storm. You throw one back into the ocean, and someone might say, well, how does that matter? You go, well, it matters to that one starfish. And I've always loved that story, because I got up on stage, as I said, and told 500 people in a room that I was about to jump off a building. And I had a bunch of veteran mates in there as well, too, a couple from Special Forces as well. And one of them walked up to me, two of them actually walked up to me. One couldn't make eye contact because I'd admitted vulnerability. The other one came up and just gave me a fist bump, and he goes, mate, that was fucking cool. He goes, more of us need to talk about that. So I got one, there was two people there. One has just gone, And he disassociated from me after that because he wants to be remembered as a hero and that we're not broken from our service. And the stats say in Australia, and I'm sure it's the same in the States, it came out about 3 or 4 years ago as part of our Prime Minister's veteran suicide research, that 46% of us leave the service with a mental, moral, or physical injury. And all my military mates, we all have, every one of us has some form of injury physically. Luckily, I don't. I still get to run marathons, but mine is up here. So the guys who have helped me have been the guys who would never be on stage in front of people and say that to 500 people, but they're the guy who'll sit you down and go, mate, what's going on? We can see you're struggling. And I just had breakfast with two of my favorite human beings who've sat me down and sat me on the couch and said, we're doing an intervention, man, because I was drinking too much and I was really lost there not too long ago. And they said, what's going on? And I put myself into rehab to do some therapy where they electrocute part of your limbic system to rewire your fight or flight response, which is very typical of veterans. And that's made a massive difference. But yeah, these people had the courage to sit down in a nice, quiet environment and just say, dude, what the fuck? And that was enough for me to know that somebody gave a shit. And, and I see a therapist. I've been seeing a therapist on and off for 5 years. And some of those have been absolutely useless because they're just going by a textbook. And you can tell they're just doing their job because they're getting paid. And then you can have a conversation with a friend or a stranger like yourself right now, right? And this is really good for me to actually hear. Like, I have a very high esteem for Vietnam vets because you were treated so poorly, but you made me the soldier I was when I was in. And that's shaped the man I am today. That is shaping another generation. And that legacy, I think, the standing on the shoulders of the giants is really important. It's an interesting debate about how do we make men more vulnerable without making them seem weak. And I don't think now, I did think the first few times when I talked to a psych about, I had panic attacks. I didn't have a panic attack till 2010. I thought I was having a heart attack. And it was because of overwhelm. Everything was so bottled up. Everyone else had seen that I was struggling for about 3 years. And I finally went to a hospital and they gave me enough Valium for 3 men my size. They said your heart rate was 220 while you were resting, and I was covered in sweat, and I was just an absolute mess. I had 2 orderlies holding me in the chair at one stage because I was just so wound up, and it took a day and a half for that to calm down. And then a psych came in and said, "Do you know what PTSD is?" I said, "No, I'm okay. I'm just overworked." And he said, "No, here's the symptoms." And he walked me through 10 of them. I had all 10. Then I did the scale test when I sat down with our Department of Veteran Affairs. They did the analysis and they said, if there was a 0 to 100 of how PTSD impacts a person, you're at 93. So the fact that you haven't sought help has actually made it worse. So I guess back to the vulnerability debate, as soon as you start to notice that something's not quite right or other people are noticing, like the people who love you most, go and speak to people. Start to do some digital, Dr. Google, do some searching, start to understand it. And if need be, go and get help. Or if nothing else, talk to people who care about you and try to get your head around it, because the more we share with people who care, I think the sooner we start to really validate that it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah, there you go. That was something that resonated with me. It's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
Let's kind of wind this up, talk about your future and your legacy here. With such a diverse range of pursuits, what legacy do you hope to leave behind?
Now that I'm a more grown-up version of myself than even a few years ago, like I've gone through 2 marriages and 2 divorces because I was too naive and too selfish and too egotistical to address my PTSD, and unfortunately 2 beautiful women suffered at that hands. So my legacy, if I have another relationship again at some time in the near future, I like that I'll finally get there and be present for someone who will get to actually have the full version of me, the healthy version of me. Yes, my books are a legacy. Yes, and the technology we're building right now will be a legacy, and hopefully some of the people I've been able to share some of my story with over the years have been legacy. But I don't think there's one legacy, right? So I've got friends, the people I just had lunch with, he told me in his 2nd year in the army, he wanted to be married, build his own house, have 2 kids, and be able to retire like in his 50s or so. And he's there right now. And my goal was always I wanted to travel the world. I wanted to write books. I wanted to ongoing education. I wanted to try new things and be open to the world. And I'm there now. So like he's achieved, he's got his kids, got his house, he's got his beautiful wife, he's got his ability to retire soon, and he's really happy. And that's a legacy and a half, right? That's fantastic. He doesn't ever want to be popular, doesn't want to be on bookshelves, doesn't want to be on TV or anything else like that, which in this day and age of Instagram fame and 15 minutes of fame, which I think is absolutely redundant, in the sense of being really morally and purposefully being important and impactful. Someone seeing 200 people seeing a social media post about me sitting at a beach somewhere in Thailand has got no value to me whatsoever. But if somebody comes up to me, as did at a writers' festival last year, and said to me, "I've just read your book, and this is what it meant to me. I disagree with you on this, but I like this." That to me is legacy. And this conversation, that's part of our legacy, because this video will outlive both of us. And that's kind of wonderful.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Now, if you could have a conversation with your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice that you give him?
Keep your head out of your ass. Don't take yourself so seriously. I had this idea in my head of what a soldier was, and that has evolved quite a bit, especially after being in uniform, and also what a man was and what a man is meant to be. And that has evolved a lot since I put on a uniform at the age of like 17. I think, I had all this stuff in my head that I thought I was absolutely certain about, and that certainty has been eradicated and watered down and redefined quite a bit over the years. So I would say to the younger version of me, don't take it as seriously, but you always bounce back. You know, you're a learning machine. Have a crack, and don't take it too seriously if it doesn't go wrong. Right, sorry, excuse me.
And where can we find your books? Are they on Amazon, Audible?
Yeah, you can go on to, if you go to chrisrhyss.co, so Chris, RHYSS.co. My books are on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, and I think other bookstores as well too. So we've got Kindle and print versions. And a couple of them I'm republishing. I'm updating them as we speak, actually. I was working on them this morning. So all 5 books, I think, by the end of next week will be across both those platforms. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Any final thoughts you have for our listeners today?
Look, all I'd say is going back to the whole woke paradox. I'm not trying to sell the book. I'm trying to sell the idea. If you can, anyone out there listening, see what James is doing right now, what I'm doing right now, that's how change happens. Individuals have the absolute power these days to change the narrative and to change society in such meaningful ways that weren't available when James went to Vietnam or even when I went to the army in the early 90s. So look at the tools at your disposal. Question the messages you hear out there that you find don't sit quite right. Look for alternate opinions and play whatever part you think you can play, because it does add up and make a difference.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on our podcast. You can catch us on LinkedIn, YouTube, as well as Facebook. So yes, you can check out. I'll send you the link so your followers can check us out if you'd like, Chris. Like I said, we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as YouTube. So I want to thank you so much, not only for your service to the country, but also for getting up on a Saturday morning. I don't know. Well, if you're sending emails out at 4:00 in the morning, I'm sure you might need some sleep right about now. But but thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you, and I'd like to have you back on the podcast. Is that amenable to you?
That would be fantastic. I've really enjoyed the discussion, and thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you so much, sir. You have a great rest of your day, and I appreciate your time so much. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Yes, that was Mr. Chris Rhyss, and fellow soldier and veteran. We appreciate his time, and we look forward to having him back on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to us this Friday evening, and I hope we can just have one positive message for one person. Hopefully we can reach more than that, but if we reach just one, that is an accomplishment. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. Have a good weekend, everyone.